This week on Bob Into Buildings, I'm taking a look at the Gaiety Theatre and the Villa Marina complex. I've seen an elevation plan on a wall in the Ellis Brown offices, and as we stood outside the Gaiety, I asked Charlie Park from Ellis Brown, when were these elevations produced?
That was done in 1991. When we started work on the complex, we were looking at the arcade and the villa and the colonnade with a view to coming up with a master plan about how the place should be redeveloped. It was obviously in a poor state at the time and required some substantial work. So we started in 1990, and in 91 we produced the master plan with the elevations and all the sketches that you referred to.
Yeah, and a wonderful plan as well, because the whole of the walkway above the colonnade was glass covered, if I remember rightly.
That's correct, yes. We were looking to provide a winter garden approach which linked the upper level of the colonnade all the way along to the upper level of the villa, and that would give us an area that could be covered and used throughout the winter, bearing in mind the weather that we get on the prom here. And in doing so, we incorporated one or two elements of it, like a bandstand in the middle which could play either to the gardens or out onto the prom, and a couple of tea rooms just to give it some life throughout the winter. And
there was an old tea room there, wasn't it, on the side of the villa? Don't I remember?
There was a number of things on the side of the villa. The villa had a colonnaded frontage in the original days, and there was a bit of a tea room linked onto the gardens at that point on the opposite side from the garden entrance to the garden room, but I don't think it was particularly well used, and it wasn't that accessible at the time.
These plans were put to, it would have been Douglas Borough Council at the time.
That's correct, yes. We did it on behalf of the Douglas Borough Council, but also with the involvement of the government. We also went out to public consultation at the time with a view to asking a number of people what they thought should happen to the villa, what should be incorporated in any redevelopment, and we got a good response to that, including the Lord Bishop, who was very helpful at the time.
But I suppose this is the life of a jobbing architect, that you produce these wonderful plans and they don't happen.
Well, we produced the plans with a view to something happening. I suppose, we looked at the overall requirements in the overall complex. Obviously, the part we weren't looking particularly at the time was the overall cost and whether it could be met. But we did come up with a way where we could develop it in parts over a long period of time as funding became available, or we could develop it all at one time if somebody made the funds immediately available. So that's the way it was looked at, and yeah, we do have these approaches in architecture that we look at master planning. Sometimes it comes off, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it takes a little while to come to fruition, and it may not include all of the elements that were first thought of.
We're going to be looking at the colonnade and also the Villa Marina a little bit later, but now we're standing on the prom walkway looking at the Gaiety Theatre itself. How good an architect was Matcham?
I suppose he was very good. The Gaiety itself has shown, what it can be like. The interior is absolutely magnificent. The exterior obviously has the frontage onto the prom, and then rather a utilitarian covering over a whole lot. But yes, he was good, and I think he's recognised as such.
Do you as an architect sort of notice and say, gosh, he was a good architect?
I suppose we do, but maybe not particularly saying, gosh, he was a good architect, more a sort of, goodness, they're nice buildings, or they've been well designed, or I can see what they've been trying to do there.
But basically, was he just recreating what he'd done in the UK? Because there's a lot of theatres similar.
There are similar theatres, but I suppose it's a genre, and obviously a period and type of architecture that was brought about. So yeah, copying might not be the best word for it. Reflective of his work, I suppose, is better.
Would you like to do something like that? Do you get a chance to do architectural designs in that style anymore?
We could if we found the right site and the right client, but it's a question of moving on. Sometimes it's appropriate to reflect on the architecture of the past, but it's better, I suppose, to be putting in something of our time so that something remains for the future generations of what was good architecture of the 20th, 21st century, as opposed to reflecting 18th, 19th, early 20th.
But I suppose we all ought to be rather pleased that they kept the Gaiety Theatre.
Oh yes, there are buildings obviously that require to be kept because of their importance and their appearance, and yes, it needs to be kept. I suppose it's in the same way as when we did the villa. We respected the villa main element, which was the Royal Hall, and the style of that. I think that's what it's about.
We then moved inside the Gaiety Theatre, and I said it had a warm, welcoming feel.
Yes, quite close to the stage in the way that it's been designed. A lot of the seating's brought in and wrapped around. So yes, it's comfortable from that viewpoint, and I suppose audience friendly.
But the wonderful thing about this theatre is when you look up at that magnificent dome in the ceiling.
Yes, and all the detailing around it, which belies some of the external appearance of the building.
Do you actually come to see any of the shows here and find yourself just looking at the ceiling?
A bit, yes.
But it is magnificent.
But I should say that's no reflection on the shows. It's just being an architect.
In the intervals, we'll say. But Matcham, I think, designed everything, didn't he?
Yes, and when we go back into the villa later on, you'll see that we did the same. I think it's all part of bringing the building together. I don't really believe in handing over the building to somebody else to do the interiors. I think it needs to be.
But at least with Ellis Brown now, does that happen very often, or do people just want the front elevation?
We try to encourage them to allow us to be involved throughout the project. In some cases, obviously, it's like in office buildings or the like, it's mostly building the exteriors, the internal plans, and having the shell ready for someone else to fit to their requirements. But if we get the opportunity, we like to do the interior work as well.
And of course, when you look at this magnificent theatre, behind the safety curtain, which is down at present, there's a whole load that actually has to work in conjunction with the audience. The levels have to be right and things like that.
Yes. Yes, the back of house and all the operational elements have got to tie in, and they obviously have to be properly functional for the building.
And then you've got all the great traps that are downstairs underneath. You've got two big ones. You've got a coffin trap, and also you've got the Corsican trap. To actually put this together, as I said earlier, Matcham was a remarkable man.
That's correct, yes. The whole thing's obviously coordinated design, and the requirements of the theatre have been fully understood, which is where proper briefing, proper working with the client, and an understanding of what is required of you comes in as the architect.
But do you think, I don't know, we don't know that much about Matcham, apart from the fact he was a genius, but did he get on with the clients, do you know? Because this is half the battle, isn't it?
Yes, I have no idea how well he got on with his clients, but on the buildings that have been produced, he obviously had some reasonable relationship with them, or he wouldn't have getting as far as he's got with the designs.
But I think he designed the wallpapers and things like this, or got the wallpapers designed.
Yes, that has happened. And happened quite frequently in the past. We've done that sort of thing as well, yes. We've sometimes designed, at the villa we designed carpets. We designed or chose the wallpapers for all of the finishes. I mean, it's what I believe is a traditional architect's role, to bring the whole thing together. When you look at Fright Lloyd Wright buildings with all the furniture designs and everything else, it ties the building as a one, rather than have a building exterior and then a completely different interior from what the architect envisaged.
But is this not a different sort of training for young architects to actually find out about ashtrays and find out about windows and things like that?
I think it is. I did a slightly different form of training all these years ago by doing the course part-time, working in an office at the same time as going through college. And I found that very valuable. I think what's happening now is there's more concentration on the design elements, but not necessarily the detailing that goes with it.
Now standing outside the Gaiety Theatre in the redesigned arcade, why the modifications, Charlie?
The Gaiety lacks disabled access, and to make it reasonably disabled friendly. So in redesigning the arcade, we made a conscious decision that we should use the difference in levels that were available from the arcade to link into the Gaiety and put a set of doors there. The additional benefit of the doors are that it allows the arcade to be available to the Gaiety. The public toilets within the arcade give a vast number of additional toilet facilities for patrons in the Gaiety at intervals, and also there's access undercover to somewhere where they can get access to the cafes. So it links the two together and gives the arcade a support function to the Gaiety.
It's nice and bright out here, isn't it? You've used sort of bright colours and glass. That must be a joy.
It was a sort of glazed form of roof, but we've replaced the whole roof in clear glass, and it's made a big difference to bringing the light back, natural light back in.
We spoke inside the Gaiety Theatre about doing all-encompassing works. I imagine we're standing on these glorious floor tiles. That was part of your scheme?
Yes, and the design of it was our design. We were fortunate that the Tile Association actually gave us an award for the tiling within the arcade when we had it completed. And the rest of the brief was to reinstate the shopping and to make the area a lot more usable. Hence, at the upper level, we've got that
got a performance
space with the focal point being the Wurlitzer organ.
And that's quite a nice little intimate space up there for a small audience.
Yes.
The sound is pretty good in here because the brass band concerts through
Yes.
the summer season are held up there. And that's a real full sound. That
Yes,
they get.
the sound always was good within it. I mean, projection from the upper level reaches fairly well down onto the lower level. A lot of it's the resonance of the solid materials and the hard floors.
Well, we better go out the lovely glass doors at the front, reflecting on what is a glorious day out there on the prom today.
Yeah.
We've chosen the best day of the year.
We probably have, but the glass doors at the front are designed in such a way that we reflect the promenade.
Charlie Park from Ellis Brown, and I then moved into the colonnade, but the design has been altered.
That's correct, yes. We've altered it twice since we started working on it. The first time that we altered it was when we altered it in its original position. If you recollect, the big areas of glass were all filled in solid when they were arcade type games and things along the colonnade. So in the early 90s we opened it up again so that we got the view through from the promenade to the gardens. We retained the windows from that time when we had another go the second time round, fit it in with a master plan approach, which was to set the central part of it between the Villa colonnade shops back in order to create a drop-off point taxi rank for the villa. So we moved it back and reconstructed it in a new position about 3 metres back from where it was.
Was that easy to do? You know, did you have to ask lots of questions of peoples to say, look, we want to alter this Victorian colonnade?
I think we had a reasonable background from the first report that we did on the master planning. We obviously made a planning application for it. The fact that we reconstructed it in the style and form that it had been, but in the new position, people just didn't remember after a couple of years of working on it that happened. The main problem with the colonnade in the original time was that the concrete work was all beginning to spall. The reinforcing was corroding, so it had to be reconstructed. So we took the opportunity in doing so to move it back in this part and create the lay-by.
We are standing now at the back of the colonnade. That's just a great view.
Yes.
Looking up a symmetrical colonnade.
Yes, it always was a great view. What we've done is we've created the doors into this area, which gives much better public access to the gardens.
And also it gives the space because farmers markets have used this in the past.
Well, yes, it gives the space for...
So it's a covered area.
For any use. It's a covered area. It's got the protection from the prevailing winds off the prom and the sea.
Moving on outside the villa, at the time of the rebuilding, was it not in good order?
It wasn't in good order. We didn't have a particular brief. We were given fairly free rein to have a look at what needed to be done to bring the villa back into proper use, as it were, back in the 1990-91 report. So looking at the function of the building, it didn't function particularly well. The entrances were on opposite sides. One directly off the prom was a poor entrance. It had no presence and it was very cramped. The other one off the Broadway side replicated an entrance at a higher level. You were a bit confused then about where you were entering the building, how the building functioned. We took the decision at the time to move the entrance to the gardens so that the gardens and the building related much better, and we brought the gardens into a better use and more of a use than they were just sitting there between the Gaiety and the arcade, and the villa as a garden. It then allowed the interaction of the gardens with the buildings. That was the first thing. The second thing that helped was because of the octagonal plan of the villa. If you entered from the gardens, you were in the middle facing the stage, which allowed you to split circulation on shorter routes and then to put support services on those circulation routes. So we made the decision at that point that this was best for the functioning and the plan form of the building.
The problem is with designs of that style, you've got so many masters, haven't you? You've got to look after Joe Public getting into the theatre, but you've got to look at the needs of performers on the stage and how they're going to get there, etc.
That's correct. We do have a backstage entrance door, and we did a lot of work on the backstage areas, a lot of work on the dressing rooms. I don't know whether you recollect, I think it was Gene Pitney at the time, there was an article that said he changed in his hotel bedroom rather than using the villa changing rooms. So that, I think, reflects the condition of the building. That doesn't happen anymore because of the work we did in the changing.
But there's so many lights and things. If it's a big orchestra, you have to get it all in from the back, because some of these Pantechnicon lorries are vast, aren't they?
Yes, we as part of the design, we were looking at how would do that. A lot of the ideas that we had in the original concepts of the villa were the multifunction use of the whole building and the possibility even of running outside broadcast. So we've got an allowance by the back door for access routes in, for outside broadcast cablings, and for a positioning for the outcast for Pantechnicons or whatever. So it's all been designed on linking the backstage function into the front stage.
Giving it extra space, because we're standing in the entranceway to the promenade suite, and then you've got the colonnade suite above. That was presumably another design decision that you made, two spaces available.
Yes, it was. We looked at it, and basically we analysed the building in its initial form, and we came up with, I suppose, three phrases of the time: the good, the bad and the ugly. The good being the Royal Hall. Fortunately, over all the years of work that had been done previously, it had remained untouched. Other parts had not, and works that had been carried out had not been in an appropriate style to the building. So reflecting on the Royal Hall as the mainstay, we then looked at the bad, which were the bits that weren't functioning very well or had major problems, and a lot of them were just the elements that ran around the Royal Hall. The Indian restaurant, which sat on the area where the promenade colonnade suites are, was riddled with dry rot, which was beginning to spread into the Royal Hall corridors. So that brought about decisions that areas like that would have to be removed to save the building. And the ugly were some extension parts that hadn't been particularly well done, like the backstage, for example, which we then took the view would be improved, and that was the starting point to clear it out. Then looking at the functionality of the building, we obviously had a main central entrance with spaces around it and to the side. So off the parts of the octagon, we created a number of spaces which could be built either independently or part of an overall scheme to help the development, which could be spread over a number of years or done in one hit, depending on funding, disruption and other considerations of that nature. So we then sort of looked at what would they be. So the colonnade promenade suite were obviously support functions that gave rooms for conference, breakout, whatever, or public use. On the other side we had a sort of entertainment-y space which was ultimately developed as the children's play area. The old entrance areas we put in the bars on both levels at both sides, which then split the audience into areas that could get it, but the bars facing the promenade could also, because of the views, be used independently. It's a once in an island lifetime opportunity, and the same with a number of buildings. You build one or you refurb one and it doesn't happen again in your lifetime.
Now upstairs at the Villa Marina, looking down on the altered entrance doors.
It brought a better approach to the building. It links the building to the gardens, gave us the opportunity of putting the porte cochere externally, which will allow VIPs to be dropped off undercover if need be, and then brings people in to a new entrance hall, and the access then splits off the entrance hall to all the elements of the building.
When you stand here and look at this, once again I was saying in the Gaiety, do you get a feeling of joy that, yeah, I was part of the design of this?
Oh yes, all the time. It doesn't seem to drop off after a number of years. You come in and you look at it and you think, yes, this is good.
I dare to ask this one, do you see faults?
Not particularly, no.
Things that you would improve?
No.
No?
No.
You got it fine?
Well, no, you never get that, but I don't think there's anything that's that far off that you would want to change.
One of the good things about it is that you've kept the idea, the sort of the style of the period. We're looking at the gentleman's door there, but that's nice. You've got a nice architrave around it, designs as well.
Yes, these were all taken from details from the original building as influences on the design. We've used the old handrail detail, or an interpretation of it on the handrailing around the stairs and on the other stairs. We've used detailing here where we designed the lamps, which was again taken from influences within the building.
There's a bit of influence of Glasgow Art School there, though, isn't there?
There is a bit, yes. But then I was educated there, so yes, there's a bit of influence. But that brings us back to what we were saying earlier. Macintosh designed everything within the art school, exterior, interior, and it's the same influence that I think has lived with me as an architect all these years. Design the interiors and the exteriors, tie the building together.
Because we're now upstairs in the villa, as I said, because it can be a cafe, can't it, the area to the right there?
Yes.
And at times, there's the art gallery on the other side.
Yes, the building was designed to be multifunctional and allow use by a number of local societies so that it was truly part of the people.
Since you were awarded this contract, have you had any other work as big as the Villa Marina Gaiety complex to work on?
We've had a number, maybe not quite as big as this, but we have had quite a number of large projects that we've worked on. The House of Manannan in Peel was one of our projects shortly after this, late 1990s, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. The redevelopment and refurbishment of government offices and the extension along there was a fairly major project. Others obviously were fairly substantial but not quite up to this level. But then, as I said earlier, there's only one of these ever in a lifetime.
And I should imagine you don't really want to be called back. Are there improvements to the whole complex that you would like to do? Would you still like to cover over the colonnade walkway in glass?
That would be a big benefit for everyone. Yes, it would be nice to do that and to bring that through, and also the addition of an element that lifted the colonnade around the frontage to give a base to the building onto the prom and then walk out on the Broadway level. There were other things in the master plan that we would like to see: the removal of the roadway that runs down between Glenfalcon Gardens and the Villa Gardens. We had a thought of just closing that and then extending all of that into a green open space as garden.
That would have been beautiful, wouldn't it?
It would have been, yes.
But
and there's an alternative route for vehicles. So yes, it would have made a big difference, I think, in terms of the setting.
But once again, all architectural practices are up against finance.
Yes, we're up against finance, we're up against, I suppose, a number of departments needing to sign up to elements such as that, and it's difficult at the time to get these all pushed through together.
But as an architectural practice, you must get used to that, the fact that you do quite a lot of work into something and then all of a sudden it doesn't go ahead.
Well, yes, not that often, but on occasions, yes.
My guest this week has been Charlie Park from the Ellis Brown Architectural Practice. We've been looking at the Villa Gaiety Villa Marina complex. Mark Tiley is next with Greatest Hits. Please join me again next week for another programme in the series. Or you can go to Manx Radio's webpage to listen again or check the podcast. Till next week, goodbye.